Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with the Average Joe Sports Show. Big Ten Media Days are in the rear view. What do we think?
I'm Gary Sharp. Win or lose, mostly lose. Nebraska fans still booze. But what happens if they win?
Hi, everybody. It's Bill Doleman. I've got some suggestions for Nebraska football the next time they bring a five-star recruit to town.
It's Elijah Herbel. He'll also quickly look ahead to the start of fall camp. It gets going Wednesday. They move in on Tuesday, so right around the corner of football season.
Welcome to it. It's the Average Joe Sports Show, episode number 47. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, as we are on the doorstep of another college football season. Fellas, media days now in the rearview mirror. Pretty excited. Matt Rule and company set to speak on Tuesday, and all sorts of Kool-Aid being handed out, the good kind of Kool-Aid, and shots being taken, things being slammed on the recruiting front, and the
Jim
buzz.
Jones.
No, the season of hope, more so hope than hype. Gary, what do you know?
You know what? I think he may have raised the expectations a shade. I think it's kind of, this might be one of the years where reality and expectations are pretty close to each other. He sees what we've said and what we see. And I think just the body language and then the language that was used, I think he may have just a little bit raised the expectations of, we all kind of said it's a bowl game this year. I mean, that's just minimum. But he gave you a little insight that there is something else there, and instead of trying to fight, man, they could win 7, they could win 8. He might be saying, you know what, there's no ceiling on this team because there's the great unknown of what it'll be like when we get into the season. So I think it was, Rule's fantastic in those situations, and he got everybody fired up for, a time where Nebraska just needs to start building momentum and stacking solid performances.
Well, it's something that he said on the Pat McAfee show about learning from Tom Coughlin, the importance of quiet confidence. It was a quietly confident Big Ten Media Days from not just Rule, but the whole Nebraska contingent, where they weren't beating their chests. They weren't saying how great they think they're going to be. But you did have that aura of the guys, of just that feeling. This is a confident bunch. They're confident in what they're put together. They're confident in the defense. They're confident they can take a step on offense. And it's things we've talked about all season long. If they are as good on defense, if they do take even a marginal step offensively, which the feel I got was I think they think they're going to make a bigger step than a marginal step on offense. But if you can do those things, you're going to be a pretty dang good football team. And that's kind of the feel I got from them, is they're confident that the work that they've put in the group of guys that they have will lead to success this season. It's quiet confidence. That's my theme of Big Ten Media Days from Nebraska.
One of the first things he said was, we have a really good team, and it was almost Frostian, if you will, that teams are going to have to contend with us. Now, that was also said around the same time that he was talking about the team having a 3.2 GPA, so maybe teams are going to have to contend with Nebraska's better than ever 3.2 GPA. So it may have been an academic conversation or a thing that he put out there. But, we talk so much about Matt Rule does not say anything without it being planned, and that there may be something to decipher in what he says. And I think there was some of that last Wednesday, but I think there was something that came out of his talk, and then what Paul Feinbaum made headlines with on Thursday or Friday, that I don't think it was planned at all. It was somewhat organic, in that I think after media days were done, people have kind of spent the weekend reviewing Nebraska again. Well, what did Matt Rule say? And if you go back and listen to the tape, he didn't mention Nebraska at all when he talked about the Big Ten having 4 teams in there. But because of what Paul Feinbaum said, people have gone back to figure out, what did Rule say about Nebraska? And he said he's got a good team. They got a great defense. They're high on Raiola. They've got Harburg and Kalen. And so I think that there's a fresh take on Nebraska after media days and after what Feinbaum said, than in the immediate aftermath of Wednesday's press conference. More people, I think, are talking about Nebraska this weekend than any other Big Ten team because of that whole organic Feinbaum dust up.
You'll take the publicity any way you can get it, right? There is no such thing. Typically, this was an innocent comment by Rule on the stage, fellas, talking about how good the league is and what the league should be. And Paul did his thing with what he wanted to say and wanted to slap down more Big Ten propaganda. There was no propaganda. It was just an honest take on a really deep and talented league. Meanwhile, that may ruffle or scare some SEC folks.
And one of the things that it underscores to me, and this is just a bit of an aside because we're going to get to recruiting in just a second, but like Nebraska having a winning football season, the national media will talk about Nebraska. Nebraska will get pumped up. It will kind of return Nebraska. I think simply one season can return Nebraska back to where it was in terms of relevancy in the national scene, importance for high school recruits, where whenever you get a Nebraska offer, it means something. And I don't think there's necessarily been that from high school recruits, and we've seen Matt Rule putting in work, but I think one season where Nebraska can go beat some teams, beat the teams that Husker fans want them to beat. And I'm talking your Colorados, your USCs, your Ohio States, Wisconsins, Iowas, the teams that aren't traditionally bottom feeders in the Big Ten. One season of doing that, I think the Paul Feinbaum comment just reinforced to me. People are still watching Nebraska. People are still caring about what Nebraska has to say. And one season where they are competing with the who's, maybe not the who's who of college football, but the important teams in college football will return Nebraska right back to where they were. It's just one winning season away. And in my eyes, that's kind of one of the things I took away from Paul Feinbaum is you're talking about a football team that missed a bowl game last year and a head coach that missed a bowl game last year, and it's still making national headlines. What will it look like whenever Nebraska has a good football season?
Nebraska gets eyeballs. They get clicks. They get conversation. And a sign that Nebraska is doing things differently is they are ticking off fan bases. Look at it in recruiting. People at Tennessee and Georgia and Ohio State are wondering, how is Nebraska in on a 5-star offensive lineman when they're selling sunshine and we're selling success? And they can't figure it out. And, it's okay. What is Nebraska doing? So there always is an interest. I don't know. I think this, guys. So as camp begins this week and everything that's happened in the offseason, and there's Bill was alluding to maybe you make a comment that can be skewed as, oh, a previous coach made that comment. I will say this. I appreciate Rule from this standpoint. He has picked a lane. He's talking about the current, the present, not the past, not the future. And he always seems to have a plan. Like if he says something is going to happen, they back it up. Exactly. And then when it comes to turnovers, we'll see during the season if they back it up from the stuff that he said they've worked on. But I think this is probably going to be, for most Husker fans, the most optimistic you've been about a season, like true optimism, where you're like, man, I feel real confident. You might initially say 19, but I'm going to have to say you might have to go back to some of the Bo years where a Husker fan goes, I'm the most optimistic since 2012, 2013, 2014, that range.
I think you got to circle 13. Think about what was coming back for Nebraska in 2013. You had what was going to be your senior year with Taylor Martinez. You still had a good, really strong running back room with Amir Abdullah. You still had a really strong offensive line. You lost some dudes on defense, but hey, it had worked out so far. They kind of found ways to plug and play. Anywho, the German, again, agrees with all of it. Gertrude, the German Shepherd, chiming in on the Average Joe Sports Show. You can check us out on the podcast page. Like and subscribe right there, iTunes and Spotify, YouTube with the Average Joe Sports Show, the AJ Sports Pod. Give us a follow there. How about we take their ass downstairs? Does that sound okay? Can we do that? We take all three of them downstairs and just walk them away. Is that good? Jesus.
This is staying in the podcast. That's the best. Take their ass to the dungeon.
It's a nice living facility.
So they
you guys are shocked and stunned, Bill. The grin says it all.
Well, I got Shaggy here polishing his Glock after all the action at your place. So,
Wow.
Shaggy and Gertie don't like one another.
Anyway.
But back to optimism. Plenty for 10th and Vine.
And can I go back? I think let's not gloss over the 2019 season had a lot of optimism as well, where you're playing on the road. I think that was at week 2 against Colorado. You're on the road. You had South Alabama week 1. They looked all right in that game. They blow it against Colorado, and you still think maybe, and there's a good start to the season before the wheels completely fell off. I mean, there was a lot of optimism headed into that 2019 season with the way the schedule set up as well. I don't think it necessarily compares to some of the Bo years, but I don't want to gloss over year 2 of Frost because there was a lot of optimism going into that season with year 2 of Adrian, the thought that some of these guys are going to pop. I believe is that year 1 of Wandale as well? Maybe not. I know you had Maurice.
Mo Washington as well.
You had Mo Washington. A lot of optimism around that team. So I don't want to gloss over 2019 in terms of optimism, but the optimism point still stands.
You know what? That team that you bring up, Elijah, that is the only time in the last decade a Nebraska football team has been ranked in the preseason. I mean, that used to be death taxes in Nebraska would be in the top 10 preseason. But only one time in the last decade have they started the year preseason top 25, and that was the 2019 season when they were 24th.
Okay, so what do we expect then when the myriad of preseason polls come out? Where is Nebraska going to be ranked? Do you
receiving votes, probably 36, 38, something like that, 40th.
35th, somewhere around there.
Didn't Rule say the other day, it's okay that we're not ranked in the top 25. We have a chance to be really good. Teams are going to have to contend with us. Got a great defense, so a lot hinges on who the quarterback is going to be and how well he plays. But has Nebraska's 61st consecutive offseason national championship resulted in that this year's team, because of that defense, is it possible Nebraska enters 2024 in the top 25?
No.
Don't think so. Okay.
No, because I think if you were a voter, like there's still a lot of unknown. You got a freshman quarterback. You also have a program that was minus 17 in turnovers last year and has this history of close losses. So I think you think highly of Nebraska, but I don't know if you'd put them in the top, in that 20 to 25 range. I mean, at this point, does it really matter? I mean,
no, it never matters anyway.
I mean, if Nebraska's going to Columbus at the end of October and they're ranked, I mean, at some point for the program, like to take that step, at some point they have to be ranked this year. I mean, you can't go another year where you're not ranked. So like, let's say they are 7-0, and we all know the 7 teams they would have played before they got to Ohio State. Realistically, where would they be ranked? I mean, are they gonna enter the poll after they beat a Colorado?
That would not surprise me, because that'll be one of the games of the day, the early season. And look what it did for Colorado last year when they beat Nebraska. The nation will be watching. It's going to be a sexy game. It'll be sold out. It'll be at night. It's Dion, it's Rule, it's all that, and the perceived rivalry for whatever that is. Again, I'm still old enough school that I don't really believe it, but that gave Colorado a lot of momentum in the first couple of weeks of the season, which they, fettered away the last 2 months. But if Nebraska wins at home and everybody's watching, the people are going to catch that fever, and it's going to be the sexy pick to put them in the top 25 somewhere.
They could be, the early season fun jump on their bandwagon team, much like Colorado a year ago, where you have a wow win. They won a shootout against TCU. Then they beat their hated air quote rival with Nebraska. And then
Thank you.
Then they have another, Pac-12 after dark rivalry game with Colorado State. There was a lot of arrows slung at one another post Nebraska leading up to that Colorado State rivalry game. Yeah, and they opened up 3-0. So the opponents aren't on the same scale for Nebraska this year. It's UTEP, it's Colorado, and then week 3, I forget, I should know, but it's not anyone that's
Northern Iowa. But if you look, here's the thing, if you look good doing it, the Buffs looked good a year ago. They were flashy, they were high flying.
They had some incredible skill dudes, and they were fun. It didn't matter that they allowed 45 points in a couple of ball games. It was fun to watch that offense and be high flying. If Nebraska can deliver on defense and be lights out dominant, be a great defense. They were really, really good last year. And then if you get just some highlight plays, yes, but you get some consistency with a run game and a freshman quarterback that looks beyond his years from a comfort standpoint, folks are going to jump on that train, man. And you could see him ranked after week 3, or if they get out of Purdue alive, going into October, unbeaten, maybe even as high as your upper teens.
The thing that helped Colorado last year is they played TCU at the beginning. They were coming off playing in the national championship game. So TCU was pretty highly thought of, and Colorado won a road game. So that got them ranked. Nebraska doesn't have that team on their schedule initially. It may be a situation where, like you were alluding to, Schmidt, where Nebraska looks good and they play well and they start to get more votes and they get into the top 25 because somebody has fallen out of the back 25, and then they find a way to stay in the top 25. I mean, I think now we can go, it's not a big deal that Nebraska's ranked, or at least that's my opinion. But I think it's important for Nebraska to spend the latter half of the year being talked about as one of the top 25 teams.
You'll have the opportunity, guys, schedule-wise this year to stay ranked. And you may have a hiccup here and there because there's a lot stacked, especially in November. But you have a chance to get into the rankings and stay in the rankings. And with Matt Rule in charge and the way he gets his guys ready and the way he's able to communicate and motivate, I think you'll see a team. He's talking no fear of failure. Sorry to go there, but it was referenced, right? Don't be afraid. And that's been a task for him to undo. A lot of the PTSD from years of tough, close losses, let alone big stage moments. And I don't know that they'll deliver against Ohio State, but by the time that game comes around, as good as Ohio State is, I don't think Nebraska will blink. I think they'll be in a different spot than they've ever been in quite some time, confidence-wise, where they'll just go let it all hang out. And if it's a 21-point loss, but, is one of those 13-point games that turned into 21, so be it. Maybe you stick and stay with them because Ohio State's overlooking. I don't know. I'm projecting. But I think they'll be a confident team this year. They'll know that on defense. They'll grow into that on offense.
But think of all the people that Matt Rule is having to sell that to. And so far, when you think about him being at a card table and he's the dealer and he's dealing his message, he's got to sell that to a fan base that has not enjoyed the success that three of us knew when we were growing up and being around Nebraska football, and Elijah Reed's the folklore. But he's selling to a fan base that it's possible to get back to where it was, and it's going to take a long time probably to get to the mid-90s. But nevertheless, it's possible, and we've got the kind of team that can get it done. He's selling that message to the media and does so very effectively, whether it be the local media or the national media. The Pat McAfees have him on all the time. He's one of the most quoted guys and affable guys in all of college football. He's a go-to, right? He is a go-to guy. Like Dabo was that a few years ago. He's kind of faded away. Saban is gone. So who's the go-to guy? Kirby Smart's not. He's a great football coach, but he's not exactly the most gregarious guy when it comes to meeting the media and the microphone. So he's selling it to a fan base. He's selling it to the media. He's got to sell it to his team. And by every indication and what we heard from the three representatives in Indianapolis, they are all kind of bought in. And you've got guys who could have gone to the NFL or gone to other schools, and they've stayed. And he's also selling it to recruits as we kind of transition to the other big topic of the weekend. But people are saying, how is Nebraska ever going to be able to recruit and get people there to get their program back to where it was? Well, you've got Raiola. Now, that was a long courtship before he finally flipped and came to Nebraska. And now you've got Sanders and Terry and Mosey and all these other guys and people who are already in camp, like a Grant Bricks. So all of the cards or all the players that are around the table that he's dealing to are really kind of all in on what he is saying, and that's remarkable. You don't get the sense that somebody is at that table going, I'm not quite there yet, because if recruits weren't, Sanders wouldn't have been here this past weekend.
And one thing I want to add to this conversation is you talk about, I guess, selling the fan base a little bit. Recruits, you can include the own team. I mean, the younger guys in the program, like, to bring it back what we were talking about 5 minutes ago, like, Nebraska's got a chance with the way the early season sets up. If we take it back to last year, by week 6, first 6 games have been played, there were 11 teams in Power 5 football that remained undefeated. This is early October. By the time you make it through the month of September, your first week of October, as conference play just starts ramping up, there were just 11 teams in Power 5 football that were undefeated. All of them found themselves in the top 15 of the AP top 25. Nebraska's got a chance through the first 6 games. If you can make it through that test against Colorado week 2, I think Colorado is probably the best test on your schedule early in the season, aside from maybe that Rutgers game, which could be a trap game, like those two. But if you can make it through Colorado, I think they're a team that's good enough to make it through Rutgers. College football doesn't necessarily work that way. Weirdness happens, upsets happen. It's why we love the sport. But if you just follow my logic here for a second, a 6-0 start likely gets Nebraska into the top 15, if not the top 10, based on how last season went. That's how hard it is to start with a winning streak to start your season. Just 11 teams. And we're talking cupcake non-conference wins, maybe 1 or 2 conference games scattered in there. That's what we're talking through the first 6 games of the season. 11 teams started undefeated. Nebraska has that opportunity this year. If you can start the season how a lot of Husker fans think you're going to, 5-1, 6-1, 6-0, somewhere in that stretch, you're likely going to find yourself in the top 15. If you remain perfect, which is possible, you're going to find yourself up there in the AP top 25. That you can sell to recruits, to fans, to the young guys within your program that, hey, what we're doing here, it's working. What we're doing here is going to get us back to national relevancy.
What's funny is think about the last time Nebraska had a single digit next to their name is that 2016 season, how it opened up, and then you had a hell of a ball game in overtime. You lost at Wisconsin, and then you got annihilated 62-3, back-to-back Saturday night ABC appearances, right? You had the Colorado game, I should say the Wisconsin game that was pretty impressive, and you just, again, shocking, didn't score in overtime. And then you go get annihilated in Columbus, second play of the game's an interception. Yeah. You can't have that. And then and we know how 2016 finished, but I think there's enough pieces here to whether a bad game or a loss, right? He's not worried about this team's response. He was talking with us, Elijah, at Media Days, as far as the ability to get through tough times. He noted how mentally strong his team is that way. They're good from a resiliency standpoint, but he spent a lot of time on confidence, and fellas, getting some of those wins, confidence will do wonders, man. You'll be able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. And that's a big part of this team this season, is getting a win or 2 wins and start stacking them from a confidence standpoint. So you feel like you're in about every ball game.
Yeah, you hope that, and I think this will be the case because you have a lot of guys that are returning that went through it last year. They were 5-7 for a reason. And I think guys learned last year. The month of November was hard. Nebraska got beat down on defense. They didn't have that cut stopper. They were their own worst enemy. And, all 4 losses that kept you away from a bowl game. So I think you learn from those. But we won't know because we're about to experience something that none of these guys on this roster have ever experienced. And that is pure week after week success. And how do you deal with it? And where people are actually talking about you and you're favored. I mean, Nebraska could be favored this year in 8 football games, including their first 7. That hasn't happened in a long time at Nebraska. So how do you deal with people that are wanting to pat you on the back? And that starts, I think, with the head coach of, you know what? This program hasn't started 1-0 since 2019, which is an amazing stat. Mm-hmm. Conference, road games, whatever. The fact that Nebraska football hasn't started 1-0, I think he's got the right mindset to start with the first game and go from there instead of fast forwarding to the end of October. because I don't think this team is yet ready to handle all of that. But if they take it slower, they should be able to handle what could be headed their way at the end of October in Columbus if they take care of business.
When you're talking about the winner's mentality, how much is that predicated on what Dylan Raiola does in his first couple of games? I mean, how much do they put on him? How much do they protect him? How much do they allow him to be who he is, to gain confidence so that he has that you have a quarterback that's got some swagger. And how much do they allow him to be who he is, and how much do they allow or protect him as a true freshman quarterback so that he doesn't get if he has a great game against UTEP, right? How much do they put the Colorado game in his hands, for example? You know, I'm getting that winner's mentality in there.
Great question.
I'm getting that winner's mentality. The kid's a winner, no question about it. He's got the poise. He's coached by NFL people. His dad's an NFL guy. But if he's the starter on opening day and things go really well against UTEP, and then you've got the Colorado game, and you've got Dion on the other side, and you have the bright lights, and he's never played in a game like that, right? So how much do you let him be himself, and how much does he have to play within the confines of the situation, I guess? That's not a rhetorical question. I'm just kind of, how are they going to handle him in that situation?
I think they're going to, I mean, this is your showcase. This is your showcase to not only land a 5-star, but what do you do with a 5-star at quarterback? Because you want more coming. Be it an offensive tackle that visited this weekend, or some defensive linemen down the road, or future quarterbacks.
Well, let me ask.
You've got to handle it appropriately, and that means you got to know the kid. You got to know the kid, and you got to know what is going to serve him and the team best. And to me, he seems kind of like a quiet grinder that's immaculately talented. So he'll refrain from shooting his mouth off or thinking he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and realize that, you know what, the nice to be X, Y, and Z 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, but haven't done anything yet. So I think he'll stay humble. I think that's a big quality. Easier said than done when everyone's patting you on the back. I get it. Everyone's head can swell. But I think he can be, from a mentality standpoint, different that way. And I think Nebraska's going to be okay with him and putting more into his hands. What can he handle? And not making him uncomfortable.
Well, let me ask the question to Gary, because the closest comparison that we have, I think, to what a quarterbacking since Dylan Raiola is probably Patrick Mahomes. They're cut from the same mold. I think Patrick Mahomes is incredibly talented, and I'm not saying Dylan Raiola is going to be Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying that there is a comparison to be made aside from the style in which they play football. I think Dylan Raiola takes a lot of his game and models it after Patrick Mahomes. So I'll ask the question to Gary, because I know he's a guy who watches the Chiefs a hell of a lot more than me. When you think back to Patrick Mahomes, if I remember from the outside looking in, like, the Chiefs didn't let him see the field. They didn't put him out there until he was at a place where he could be himself and find success. I'm not quite sure Nebraska has that luxury, but whenever you're looking at some of these early season tests, that aside from Colorado, I mean, UTEP, Northern Iowa, I think you can let him go out there and be himself in a way that he finds success. The problem is you're throwing him into a much different situation where the Chiefs were a playoff team with a lot of fantastic pieces, the best tight end in football, one of the best wide receivers in football. That's who you're throwing Patrick Mahomes out there with, and he gets to be himself, and being himself led to success. Can you do the same thing with Dylan Raiola, considering, I mean, from the outside looking in, he does appear to be the number one guy that you have to roll with?
No, I like where you're going here. Nebraska doesn't have an Alex Smith, where you basically could redshirt a guy and he can learn from a great mentor where there's no pressure and you ease him in. They don't have that luxury because they don't have a guy that's in front of him. He's the best quarterback on campus. And I don't worry about them, putting the brakes on him, because it is all gas, no brakes with Raiola. Dad is involved. Younger brother's involved. His sister is in the recruiting office. They have gone all in on this. He's out there recruiting, peer recruiting to a whole nother level. So they're not gonna let him go somewhere where they're not comfortable letting him go. And I think they've seen enough, and his teammates have seen enough, that they think that this could be the real deal. And so they're just going to let him be himself. And I here's what I want to happen. And if it doesn't happen, watch out. He's going to have to deal with adversity. He's always had success. Wherever he has played, this is different. This is a jump up to Division I college football. And there's going to be teams that are going to try and hurt him. There's going to be teams that are going to try and mess with him. He's going to have a bad day at the office. And I want to see that because I want to see what his reaction is. Like, what happens the next time he goes out there? What happens the next time he goes out there after a game against Colorado where their whole goal is to knock him out of the game? And how does he develop that part of his game? But I think Nebraska is all in. Rule this week, he let it slip when he started to talk about some of the special things about Dylan, and then he caught himself and he mentioned Kalen had a really good day the following day. So I think it's about time that they're going to unleash him, and you're going to see that Nebraska has somebody that can change the projection, the trajectory, and the mood of a program just by playing one position. That hasn't happened since a guy came from Bradenton, Florida, a long, long time ago. And I'm not, and Tommy was a national championship guy and he was different, but I'm looking at it from where Nebraska football was, and they were in a much better spot in the early 90s than they are now. One person, how they change your mood where they allow you to dream. If Nebraska had Kyle McCord at quarterback, would we have had this conversation about, is this the most optimistic you've been since?
No,
absolutely not, because you've got a guy you've seen that you're all right. It's a nice option, but this is hope delivered. If you're a Nebraska football fan,
it just allows you to dream. You have a quarterback that allows you to dream, and you also have a program that hasn't put all the onus on him. You look, they have built up their roster on the offensive side of the ball around him, not saying we have Adrian, just go and be amazing. Nebraska failed Adrian Martinez. Matt Rule is not going to fail Dylan Raiola, even if Raiola is the real deal.
You know, you talk about wanting to knock him out of the game. Colorado did that to Adrian Martinez, right? I mean, they went after him and they did it. It was mission accomplished with that leg twist, right? And you talk about Kyle McCord when Dylan Raiola had announced he was going to Georgia and Danny Kalen said him coming to Nebraska, people were pretty excited about Danny Kalen coming because there wasn't very much. Yeah, Kyle McCord played at Ohio State, but it was kind of that Tanner Lee, 1 year. We got him for a year, but Danny's our guy. He's the future. And it was, when is Danny going to play this year? Well, now it's like, okay, make sure we put Danny on the shelf so he preserves his redshirt year because we have Harburg and Raiola, at 1A, 1B, and 1C, whatever the conversation is. But there wasn't that kind of confidence at all when Kyle McCord was in town, and that was like the same day that Raiola, the Raiola rumors started to percolate. But people were very thankful that Danny Kalen was coming to Nebraska because the confidence level in Kyle McCord was certainly not there. Now they're happy as hell that he's in Syracuse. They're dreaming of 6 or 7 wins. So congratulations to them.
It's Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, the Average Joe Sports Show podcast, episode 47, Spotify and iTunes, where you can download the audio, the video on YouTube, the Average Joe Sports Show. Like and subscribe there. It don't cost you nothing, as Bluto said, as you walk into the Delta house.
We ain't here to play school.
No, we are not. Sharpie, you are right there. And give us a follow on Twitter at the AJ Sports Pod. Guys, Final 10. Let's hit recruiting, and it's been a monumental weekend. The Big Red Barbecue with a lot of 26 and 27 talents finding their way to Lincoln, but a hell of a lot of optimism on the recruiting front with David Sanders Jr. Making his way to Lincoln, and Dylan Raiola being the man that drove him around that giant Mercedes
Sprinter van.
Yeah, Sprinter van is the best way to put it. And you also, of course, had Mosey that's now projected. Isaiah's the wideout that's at Oregon. His dad's now on staff in Lincoln. And projection says, as we record here, he's going from the Quackers to the Big Red. Michael Terry also some positive momentum. Just a really big push before the here and now, that present, that current lane Nebraska is embarking on with the 2024 season. But they didn't forget to look ahead to 2025 and really try and put an exclamation point on some final pieces to this class. And awesome for the Nebraska fan base to turn out like they did. And you're not going to get into an arm wrestling match between the Nebraska fan base and win. And a pretty big showcase by Nebraska's fans versus the Tennessee fans. At least that's what social media is painting.
I mean, Nebraska's best resources are fans.
Yep.
And I'm glad they're seeing them use it. It is crazy. I mean, they've got some momentum. And it's okay to say out loud that what happens if Nebraska starts winning? Like even this year, even during the course of the year, what does recruiting look like? But it's been impressive to get a real seat at the table with some of the top players at their respective positions in the class of 25. I think says a lot about Matt Rule. It says a lot about momentum, about where they're headed and their ability to sell Nebraska. And then I think that the next step is, and you know, you guys may feel the same way, is Nebraska has done a really good job strategically of incorporating the NIL. They know they got to play the game, but how far are they going to play the game? But they are not avoiding, well, we just want to be traditional recruiters. And you know what? If we get outbid, we get outbid. No, we're going to do the traditional part because we understand high school recruiting is number one. And if we have to play that game, Nebraska's not going to back down.
They need to have that mentality, don't they? I mean, don't take a back seat.
To get guys you want today, if that's what it's going to take to get you across the finish line, and you feel confident that if you play that game, you're going to get somebody you want, and it's not going to be a guy that's just here for the money because you built a relationship and you feel comfortable, certainly.
Well, to steal Paul Feinbaum's, going back to that, to steal his phrase, you stay in your lane. Matt Rule, Nebraska's not staying in its lane and hasn't for, 50 years when it comes to recruiting. It's wherever we got to send crazy Uncle George Darlington, we're going to do that. Wherever we need to send Ron Brown, Frank Solich, and Turner Gill, we will go do that. And now it is, where do we need to send Ed Foley around Nebraska? Where does Matt Rule need to go? Where do we need to send Donovan Raiola? Make sure that we're up to date on the family Christmas cards, all of that. So there has been no staying in the lane when it comes to recruiting. And look, I'm not a big fan of recruiting. I get the game, all right. I understand that that's how it's played, but I'm not a big fan. But I do respect the fact that if there is somebody who is a perceived 4 or 5 star, that Nebraska is not afraid to take a swing at him, even if it is in an area that is not really been on Nebraska's radar. Charlotte, North Carolina has not produced a ton of former Huskers. Cam Lenhart, Staten Island, New York. Now, that was the other staff, but they had to re-recruit him. They weren't afraid to go after a guy from Staten Island, an IMG, and say, believe in us again, and they went after and did. They didn't sit on, we're not going to get him. Now, I am disappointed in this. Why was that Sprinter van not wrapped? Shouldn't that have had Husker stuff all over it? I don't know whose it was, but it seems to me that should have been wrapped in something. And if it's Dylan's backup ride, shouldn't that have whatever, NIL deal he's repping? Okay, so we got to get that game going a little bit better. I was critical of Matt Rule and the pocket square game at Media Day. That was a skew. We need to improve that. But if that's Raiola's backup ride, like Jay Leno with a whole Quonset hut full of old cars. Maybe Dylan's got 3 or 4 that he's rolling. That thing should have been wrapped in red. Well, and all kinds of stuff.
To be fair, for all that could be Dylan's main ride. For all we know, maybe he's just got a Sprinter ride or Sprinter van type ride thing going on. You never know.
He's got a driver, and he's got a film crew in back, and he's got a film study session on the side. It's one of those mobile studios.
Okay, but if you really wanted to make an impact, and I'm pretty sure, Gary, you're in Omaha, that they could have worked it out. Why didn't they pick him up in the Husker 18-wheeler?
That's a good. Well, because I think
that would have been pretty cool to pick him up, pull that bad boy right up to the terminal at Ebley Airfield. Sanders gets off, and the family walks into the front cab of that big ass 18-wheeler like they did for Grant Brooks, and then police escort him right down to the Horseshoe. 400 Husker fans are there. Should have called me.
Yeah, I don't know if that our airport's under a little bit of construction for the next plus years.
Yes, it is.
Take it out to the tarmac then, all right?
What they should have done is they should have driven it to Knoxville and just parked it outside of Neyland Stadium and just left it.
Laid on the horn. 24 hours.
Now we're thinking.
Hey, but the other part of his visit is, do you take somebody to the top of the Capitol?
I like that.
Yes.
I like that.
This is all yours.
How many Nebraskans have gone on that field trip to the top of the Capitol?
All of us.
I've done it by myself without even the field trip. Just go up there for fun. You have a great view of Memorial Stadium, just to let you know.
Yeah.
Well, junior when he was in
on
fourth
Saturdays.
grade.
Yeah, no, that's where I'm going to be for their scrimmages this fall when it's closed to the media. Up there with binoculars.
Nice job, Connor.
Look, I think that was a nice. I mean, you can't do that at Happy Valley. There are other places around the country where there may be some more sites. And I've told a story on the Hale Varsity Radio Show about a buddy of mine who was recruited by Miami. And they picked him up at the Miami airport, and they headed straight to South Beach. And he said, "When am I going to have a chance to go see the campus?" And they said, "Well, that's not on the planning on the schedule, so you won't have a chance. It's like under construction or something." You end up going to Notre Dame.
We're going to find you beautiful women and clubs to check out. The library will still be there when you enroll. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Billy D, as we say goodbye, how was the high school reunion? No letter jacket on the episode today for the Average Joe Sports Show. But
totally, though. Up with your colors, boys. Proudly we hail. True sons of Fairbury. We hold our banners high. Yep. Yeah, it was a good time. Not everybody showed up, but nevertheless, it was nice to go back and see the hometown and share that secret that has been Nebraska's greatest mystery. What is it, Jeff?
Well, are you at the age now where when people don't show up to the high school reunion, you have to start checking obituaries?
Yeah. Wow. I'm not gonna lie. It happens.
Was there any people hooking up?
Not that I know of. I don't think people were able to last that long. Yeah, it was more of an afternoon type reunion. But there was a Guinness. So
all right, yep. Guinness does live and breathe in Fairbury.
And we talked about the record-setting night of my all-time great free throw, setting the all-time record for free throw shooting at the Bob Devaney Sports Center. That was a big topic of conversation, of course. As was the fact that during my entire high school football career, we never won a game. Not in freshman, not JV, not JV reserve, not varsity. Now, I wasn't a part of all of those losses, but a couple of my classmates, 0-45.
Perfect. They covered, right? Always. They were consistent. Yeah. We'll be back at you next time as we have more thoughts from Matt Rule as camp gets underway. Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, The Average Joe Sports Show. The Average Joe Sports Show is found on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. The AJ Sports Pod on Twitter. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks.